You ready for the 2025 fantasy football season? Okay, you're not quite there yet. We'll get you ready. Let's take a look at the first round of what next year's draft for fantasy could look like. We're going to assume a 12-team PPR league, and we're going to give you our picks, pick by pick, for round one. All right, Chris, I almost hate to ask because in recent years, the 1.1 has been a little bit cursed. So who should be the number one pick this coming year?
Well, I hate to do this to Ja'Marr Chase. Hopefully we don't curse him, but I think it's got to be Ja'Marr Chase. He was unbelievable this year, won the Triple Crown. We saw what a healthy Burrow and a healthy Ja'Marr Chase can do over an entire season. Yeah, I know it's the 101 and it's been cursed, but you got to pick somebody, so why not pick Ja'Marr Chase?
Exactly. I mean, it would be hard to imagine anybody other than Chase being the number one pick. You could obviously make a strong case for a lot of players, but there's no reason to pick against Chase. And hey, I guess at the very least, even though the Bengals didn't make the playoffs, he'll be better rested than some of these other players who are possibly going deep into a playoff run. And now number two, just like that, it's not clear who should be the next pick because, well, again, a lot of players could make a case for being the next guy after Chase, and we don't even agree on this one. Who do you have?
I have Justin Jefferson at number 2. Again, if you're in half PPR, non-PPR, maybe you could talk me into one of the running backs here, but in full PPR, I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson. I think at this point, there should be no worry about who the quarterback will be next year, although it'll probably be Sam Darnold again. Justin Jefferson is QB proof. This guy is awesome. Every year he's been in the NFL, he'll be my number 2.
I could see going wide receiver at number 2, and for a while we thought that's the smart thing to do, right? Maybe you take a CMC or one of those, standout running backs, but it's safer to go wide receiver. Not this year. You took a guy like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, not Christian McCaffrey, of course. Those running backs really carried the way. I'm going to go Saquon Barkley here because we've seen how a guy who we already knew could be the best running back in the league just needed to go to a good team. Guess what happened? He went to a good team with a good offensive line, and he exploded. I could have set the record for rushing if he'd actually played in the final week. So, yeah, I'm going to hitch my wagon to that stud running back and go Barkley here. Now, you're not waiting too long. Number 3, you're going RB.
I am, but not Saquon Barkley. I'm going Bijan Robinson. I'm going to put Bijan Robinson slightly ahead of Saquon Barkley for just a few kind of small reasons. Number 1, he's younger. He's entering his running back prime. He's got less wear and tear on him. But also, number 2, he catches more passes than Saquon Barkley. That is something we did not see in Philadelphia. We did not see Saquon Barkley be a prolific pass catcher. He was okay, but Bijan Robinson is used both, as a workhorse runner and an elite pass catcher. I still like this Falcons offense next year with Michael Penix Jr., so I'm going to put Bijan at number 3.
Well, I also have Bijan number 3. Again, I could actually see going either way, Bijan or Saquon, 2 and 3. I really don't have a very strong opinion. The reason I gave Barkley the edge is just because at running back specifically, I'm going to prefer the player in the better overall offense with a better O-line. And right now, I think that's Barkley and the Eagles. But yeah, Bijan, again, should be an absolute stud again. So with that said, looks like you have Saquon Barkley number 4. Do you see both Barkley and Bijan interchangeable, or do you definitely have Bijan ahead of him?
I mean, it's hard to say I definitely have Bijan ahead of Saquon Barkley. I'd be fine with anybody who drafts Saquon Barkley ahead of Bijan. Again, I gave my reasons for having Bijan ahead, but Saquon Barkley is right there next after Bijan. Both these guys should be great.
All right, so number 4, I'm going back to wide receiver. The guy who was a lot of drafts, though the 1.1 this past year, if it wasn't CMC, it was CeeDee Lamb, and he was taken second in a lot of drafts. I think it's easy to forget why we thought he could be the number 1 receiver, number 1 player in fantasy, but then Dak Prescott missed half the season, and then CeeDee Lamb didn't help you out in the playoffs because he got hurt. But why? Why would he not be potentially the number 1 receiver in the league behind Ja'Marr Chase? So I'm going to put Lamb 4. And that's where you have him at number 5, going CD here. What are your thoughts on CD entering 2025? Is he going to do what we were hoping he would do last year?
I don't see why not. It sounds like the Cowboys are just going to run it back. They're going to run it back with Mike McCarthy, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. Again, he was even pretty good with Cooper Rush until he had that shoulder injury. So why wouldn't we see a big bounce back year from CeeDee Lamb? Now, also, let's not forget he missed most of training camp last year with that holdout. That will not be an issue. I think we see CeeDee Lamb more like we saw in 2023.
But I already picked Lamb at 5 now. I'm can't even believe that this is where I have Justin Jefferson. This is nothing against Justin Jefferson. I don't have any concerns, all right? There's no red flags here. It's just, I look at where he finished. I look at where I think CeeDee Lamb is going to finish. I just have him a little bit higher, and I'm going with running backs before wide receivers after Chase. So again, I have no reason not to pick Justin Jefferson, even as high as number 2. I just happen to have him 5th. All right, now things are going to get even more interesting. Who's going to be number 6 for you?
Number 6 for me is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. Once again, was great mostly this year. Gives you such a high floor with a good ceiling. I know there's worries that Ben Johnson will leave in the offseason, but I don't think like this Lions offense is just going to implode because Ben Johnson is gone. It'll still be fine. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a stud. He's the number 1 option in this offense, one of the best offenses in fantasy and in real life. So I got him at 6.
I'm going Malik Neighbors. Look, Malik Neighbors, even the last couple of weeks with Drew Lock back at quarterback, was able to put up big numbers. His target share was insanely high. And you know what? I don't feel like the Giants are bringing in competition at wide receiver. I feel like they're going to finally maybe bring in a legitimate quarterback. They've got the number 3 pick. They've got to do it. Like, I don't even care if it's Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders or whoever else. They're going to bring in a quarterback who has to be better than what he had to deal with in his rookie season. The sky's the limit for Malik Neighbors. He legitimately could be the next Jamar Chase, and it could start as soon as this year. All right, now we're on to pick number 7. Going wide receiver again?
I am. I'm going Puka Nacua. Again, the clear number 1 alpha wide receiver in this Rams offense. Cooper Kupp looks very dusty, even if he's back with the Rams next year, which I think is probably 50-50 right now. But either way, Puka is an absolute stud wide receiver. Matthew Stafford is good enough to support Puka Nacua as an every week wide receiver 1. Again, another guy with such an insanely high floor to go with a good ceiling.
That's where I have Amon-Ra St. Brown at 7. You said it, insanely high floor with a high weekly ceiling. Again, even if the offensive coordinator does change this coming year, if Ben Johnson goes, don't think that's going to affect him. It's not like this guy was made from this system. He's not like a system type of player. I think the system works because Amon-Ra St. Brown is so good. All right, now down to the 8th pick, another Lion.
Another Lion, Jahmyr Gibbs. And I've seen a lot of people ranking Jahmyr Gibbs higher, and I get it because this guy was unbelievable down the stretch for this team. But you got to remember, that was without David Montgomery. Look, if David Montgomery was out of the picture, I think Jahmyr Gibbs might be my 101. But David Montgomery is not out of the picture, and he's going to be there enough to steal enough touchdowns, enough touches to keep Jahmyr Gibbs from being, the number 1 highest scoring running back. But even this year, we saw, even with Monty on the field, Gibbs was still awesome. I can't drop him too low, so this is where I'm going to put Gibbs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll talk about that in a minute with Gibbs. But first, at number 8, I'm going to go with Puka. The only thing with Puka Nacua is you got to wonder if Matthew Stafford still has it. It's not looked great to finish the 24 season. He's getting up there in age, even for a quarterback. So as long as he's got his arm still intact and nothing else major changes in this offense, yeah, I think Puka still is enough of a target hog. He has to be considered a first rounder. Now, at number 9, is this too high or too low for CMC?
Well, for me, it's just right. And I'll be honest, this is where it starts to get tough for me. Those first 8 guys, I mean, maybe you could argue the order a little bit, but I feel like those are probably the 8 best players in fantasy right now. This is where I feel like it starts to get tough. Like there's probably maybe 6, 7, 8 guys I could all make an argument for here, but I'm going to put Christian McCaffrey here at number 9 because this is the kind of guy, one of the few guys that, really is left on the board that we haven't talked about yet, that could legitimately finish as the number 1 at his position because he's done it multiple times in his career. He just needs to be healthy. I'm going to gamble on that. He just said, hey, if we were in the playoffs, I'd be good to go. I'd be playing. He should be fine for next season. Obviously, it's a long offseason. Anything can happen. But assuming he is 100% good to go in week 1, I think we're going to see CMC's ADP move up and up and up all offseason long. I'm going to put him at 9.
I don't want to be, the person that falls into the trap, the recency bias. And that's why I don't want to put CMC too low, but I don't have him here yet. I'm going with Jahmyr Gibbs. So on the same hand here, as far as recency bias, I've seen an early expert consensus. He's a top 5 pick. And I think that's just looking at what did he do in the fantasy playoffs? Yeah, he was great without David Montgomery. So let's take a step back and realize, yes, he's a stud, but he's not all of a sudden going to be a bell cow. I'm not going to put him up there with Bijan and Barkley. So I feel like, yeah, first round, top 10, sure, but barely. All right, so number 10, you got Malik Neighbors in here, barely in the top 10. Do you feel like this is still his ceiling based on whatever the Giants do at quarterback?
No, again, I kind of like Christian McCaffrey. I feel like Malik Neighbors' ceiling is the top scoring wide receiver in fantasy football, but it's obviously going to depend on what the Giants do. I know right now we just assume that they're going to draft a quarterback, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to be significantly better for Malik Neighbors next year. Now, it's probably not going to be worse, but it's not like he's going to necessarily get a Jaden Daniels type of upgrade. He might get a Caleb Williams type of upgrade where he still is very good for fantasy, but maybe not quite to his ceiling yet. That's why I have him at 10.
Look, going to number 10 here, I'm going to go with Devon Achane. You know, I'll tell you what, when I first drafted my list, my ranking of first round picks, I didn't have Achane in there because we've seen what this offense looked like without Tua Tagovailoa in, and the fact that it took a major step back. But then I also had to look at the fact that Tyreek Hill sounds like he's out, and it's probably going to be either he is gone or he's less a part of this offense. And that could just help Devon Achane. I mean, he gets so many touches as a receiver, not just as a running back. We know that they don't have any other running backs in the mix here because Raheem Mostert is officially turned to dust. So I think the ceiling is too high to leave Achane out of the first round. Only 2 more players can fit in the first round here. Who you got at 11?
Again, sticking with my theme of players that could potentially finish number 1 at their position that I can get late in the first round, I'm going with Nico Collins here. He was the highest scoring wide receiver until his injury, and now he's going to roll into 2025 with probably no Tank Dell for most or all of the season. Stephon Diggs probably going to miss part of the season, and he's coming back from an ACL tear. And you got to think the Texans' number 1 priority, let's hope, is to bolster that offensive line. I think we could see Nico Collins be even better than he was last year. So I can't quite put him as high as like the Jeffersons, the Chases, those guys just yet. But he's got the potential also to be the number 1 scorer. I think he's got to be in the first round.
I would put Nico here, but I'm going with a different receiver. I just feel like the ceiling is a little bit higher for Brian Thomas Jr. We saw how great he was down the stretch, even with Mac Jones. I mean, that's enough to convince me that if Trevor Lawrence comes back, this guy's going to be absolutely elite on a weekly basis. And so with a new coach in town, I think that's just going to improve the Jags offense because Doug Peterson, obviously his time was up there. I mean, that offense just became stagnant despite how many weapons they have. So yeah, Brian Thomas Jr., the ceiling is still sky high for him. And then who slots in number 12?
Well, I'm going with Devon Achane. You talked about it earlier. Again, I'm chasing that potential to be the number 1 scoring running back. It's really weird here. You look at him in games Tua didn't start. He was absolutely mostly terrible. But you look at the games where Tua started, he averaged 22.6 PPR points per game, second only to Saquon Barkley. Again, we have to just bank on guys staying healthy. I know Tua has never played a full season, but we got to bank on it happening, kind of like Burrow and Chase this year, right? The big knock was these guys can't play a full season. But look what happens when they do. We got to take that chance. It's fantasy football. Every pick has risk. Let's take the risk on a guy who, if his quarterback stays healthy, can also finish as the RB1.
And so here at 12, I think we have to at least take the risk on Christian McCaffrey because it's not like he's guaranteed to be injured again next year. The only reason he's this low is because we know the risk is real. We know this is a running back with a lot of wear and tear, obviously missed almost the entire season. I know anybody who did draft CMC 1.1 really just doesn't want any part of that this year, but you can't just ignore a guy who has the upside to basically be the top player in all of fantasy. So this is where it's worth the risk for me. You do have to weigh the potential risk of an injury, of him just not being the same guy anymore versus the potential reward. I feel like this is where it's at. It's never too early to do draft prep. Stick with us all off season long. We're going to be here for you, help you get ready with our rankings, projections, sleepers, busts, all of that. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up.